Well, about 10 years ago, when I was in Shell still, we were developing, Shell Canada was beginning to develop the oil sands. And we had a commitment then in the late 90s on climate, and we wanted to be sure that whatever we were doing was not completely incompatible with our commitment. And we decided that we'd form an external panel, and David Runnels was absolutely fundamental to helping us set that up, because this required building trust with NGOs who did not necessarily trust us. There were all sorts of issues about, well, if we have an advisory panel, what happens if you don't take our advice? You know, we're taking risks by doing this. It's potentially damaging to our reputations and so on. And David was just extremely sensible and helpful in setting that process up. I think we would not have been able to do it without his influence. I got to know him through that and enjoyed that. And then he said to me sometime later, well, it must have been 6 years ago or so, would I, after I'd retired from Shell, I think, yes, must have been, would I join the board? And because of that relationship, and I'd learnt something about the work of IISD, and I just think the work that IISD does is really critical to being thoughtful work on policy and strategy which takes into account economic and business realities. This isn't pie in the sky stuff, it's very focused and realistic, and that's why I've always enjoyed working with the IISD, and their pragmatic approach to the Institute on the realities of pressures on governments, pressures on business, but at the same time keeping this focus on sustainable development. So it's very exciting. Well, I think there are, I mean, this is sustainable development, which we've been talking about for 20 years or so, is an enormous challenge. And again, when I go back to my Shell days, when we revised our business principles, we put in references to sustainable development. We actually put in we made three changes. One was on clarifying our stance on politics, which people had pointed out was not clear. We knew what it meant, but it wasn't clear. Putting in a lot of stuff on human rights, which we hadn't really explicitly addressed before. And then we put in references to sustainable development. And I always say, to the irritation of some of the people who did work on that, that we actually understood least about what sustainable development meant. I think that's true. People generally, it's the understanding of sustainable development, what it actually means, is still, I think, relatively low in society as a whole. People either express unachievable extremes, which is kind of more or less do nothing, or they don't actually understand what all the commitments and the way the whole mechanism, the clockwork fits together. And I think there will always be a role for thoughtful institutions and a research institution such as IISD in picking out the pieces of this. And what's being done at the moment, I think, is brilliant. I think that the work on trade, the work on subsidies is really groundbreaking, and I get very excited by it. Well, I've spent all my life in the energy industry. Energy is something which is very important to a modern way of life, as it were. We couldn't support the world's population without it. I'm now in the mining industry. We can't operate without the products of mines. The question is, how can we do this without damaging communities, damaging the environment. And in the case of hydrocarbon companies, our very product has an impact on climate. So this is a fundamental threat and a huge dilemma. We need more energy in order for people to be lifted out of poverty, to live better lives, to have employment, to have sustainable livelihoods. We can use that energy much more efficiently in the developed part of the world, the industrialized part of the world. So that, to me, is the huge dilemma. And how do we address these? The energy pull on the one hand, the enormous need for energy efficient use of energy, and then changing the nature of the energy that we use. That's kind of enough to keep you going for a lifetime, because it's a very difficult challenge. And in my career, in the energy industry, in the mining industry, and we mine coal as well. We're going to need coal, but we have to address how we use it.